Hello, welcome to another Azure Centric Podcast. My name is Marcos Nogueira, and here with me on our Azure Weekly Update show, I have that beautiful face that everyone knows on the internet, that is Andrew Lowes. How are you, my friend?
I do know myself, and occasionally I am on the internet,
Yes,
so I'm
you are famous, I have to say.
when I Google myself, I'm right there. So yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me, how have you been? Azure's had kind of some ups and downs, right? We've had a couple of busy periods. We got busy, kind of alongside Azure, and then we've had some kind of low weeks with just like a handful of updates to do.
True.
We haven't recorded every
Yes.
kind of instance in this case because we've been busy with those kind of peaks. But how have you been doing?
I've been awesome, to be very honest. It's been a difficult week for my family, but nevertheless, we've been awesome. A lot of work, like you said, a lot of good things happening on Azure. Now, Azure never stops, even if we are with peak of work, which is good, always good. A lot of good things coming. I think they are starting. We're starting to see this every time that we are reaching to a major kind of um, how I can say a major Microsoft uh, Microsoft event. We are very close to build, so we will
Yeah,
see
I think builds coming up.
builds
Yeah.
coming up. I think next month, something like that. Um, and we are starting to see a little bit of those updates coming not as frequently. It's not the busiest week that we had, to be very honest, but it's a good week, I have to say. A lot of interesting updates, and I think we have a team we
Mm.
can call the previews team, um, because a lot
Yeah,
of
there is a special in there that made me laugh a
yeah,
little
and there
bit
is
too hard.
a how you say it? It's a tongue twist, something like that.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, we'll save it as a special
yeah.
surprise coming up
Yes,
later.
you have to be here to see that happening. But yes, with that, I just want to thank because I did receive quite a few good messages saying, "Hey, what happened with you guys? You are doing a hit and miss over here," and say, "Yes, you are absolutely true." They although
Mhm.
they love the way that we are doing all of these kind of press one time record and goes because it feels natural and it feels like a conversation that it is a conversation between the both of us that we have a few
We don't even know how to do video editing, so you guys are safe. Yeah.
that part we should cut it, but that's okay.
Well, we know how to do the little clips,
Exactly,
right? But
exactly.
yeah, we're not video editing experts. We don't have
No,
time for
no,
that
no,
kind of
not
thing.
not at all. But I don't want to start without thanking everyone and without asking for
Absolutely.
your help to just keep this community growing. So don't forget to subscribe. Even if you are coming from the for the audio podcast and not the video podcast, it doesn't matter. We love your feedback. We love you in
Absolutely.
this case, and we want to hear more from you. So without further ado, let's roll and let's start the updates. So welcome back, and let's jump to the first one. That is the public preview of Azure Monitor and Azure Managed Grafana integration. So even during our pre kind of session that we had for this week, um, we were talking about Azure Managed Grafana, or in this case, Grafana, right? It's what
Exactly.
it is before we starting diving deep into this. What is,
Yeah.
in your point of view, Azure Managed Grafana, or and how is that integrates with Azure Monitor?
So for me, because when we were chatting about this, we thought let's take a little bit of a look at this, make sure we understand what the overlay is, right? So we have Azure Monitor and certainly can potentially collect significant, like lots of data,
Yes.
right? So Grafana is kind of a cool thing because now Grafana allows us to really get started kind of right out of the box with doing some visual dashboards. And it's not dashboards like what we know and love in Azure Monitor. And you and I talk about it with different clients and even with each other every single week. We're talking about Azure Monitor in one flavor or another. Grafana takes it to kind of a new level, right? So it takes our dashboards and now we can look pretty slick. We can put some pretty cool graph displays, but also kind of like those speedometer ones that have the charts that like the needle that comes up with the percentage kind of a thing. So we can really display different types of data that we're looking at inside Azure Monitor in very meaningful ways, right? So when you and I were chatting about it before we started the podcast a bit, we kind of looked at it and said, "Hey, this can replace a lot of third-party add-ins that we know everybody is using to help visualize the data, but there's some cool kind of sub features with Grafana as well, right? So we can still use things like Teams dashboards or team dashboards, not to be confused with Microsoft Teams. I should probably say that. Team dashboards in Azure Monitor. So, for example, Marcos and I could share a dashboard between us that looks at the same data, and we can load it, him on his workstation and me on my workstation. Um, so there's some cool things that we can do. We can download them. We can use them and connect. We can integrate them. We can even edit and save back to the team's to that team dashboard that we're sharing with each other, and update different things. But it's such a cool way. We run the query, and in Grafana, the tool visualizes the data for us. So it's a new way, not necessarily new. It's a different way that enables us to do new things with our data, right?
Absolutely. And the good part of this is like you mentioned, is the part of allowing us to just transpond what it is on that you have a kind of a way with Azure Resource Graph, right? That you have that,
Mhm.
but allows you to just query that information and to just visualize way more quickly and easier the information that, for example, you are coming from the logs. So that you are getting from the full stack of the Azure application when you're doing out of the box, in this case, Grafana dashboards. And it's very simple to do it. It makes our life way more easier and enables another potential, like you mentioned, the possibility of downloading those and going, in this case, on the of the possibility of um just going there and be able to download those and having these on a TV or a big screen or something like that, or even as a side, and you don't need to have Azure open. It's pretty cool, I have to say.
Right? Yeah. So, and Grafana comes with some stock
Yes.
dashboards, right? So they have a whole bunch. This is one thing that I think is really underrated about Azure in
Yes.
general, is there's a ton of stock stuff that Microsoft, their product and development teams work so hard, and they create all these things for us to kind of just sit there and wait for us to click on it and use it. So these stock dashboards in Grafana is one of those things, right? So Azure Monitor Alerts, kind of stock dashboard, we don't have to configure anything. We just connect it to our Azure Monitor data and it works. So it comes up with like the subtotals, and then underneath it has kind of the running tally of the different alerts that are happening within our environment.
Yeah.
So that could be I mean, my mind is racing because I'm thinking already. I know two of my clients that I want to implement kind of a subset of this with, because I think that their monitoring teams and their knock teams are going to be super excited about this,
Absolutely.
because we can we can reach to like GCP and AWS and kind of, on prem, your prem, my prem, everybody's prem. We can do all kinds of things with Azure
Yeah.
Monitor, right? It's not my fault. There's daylight.
Yes, we have to do that disclaimer that there is daylight, and usually daylight we felt a little bit more dangerous, but that's okay. But what I like about this is, like you mentioned, those out of the box, right? And even with
Mhm.
Grafana, okay, that basically, it's nothing more than a popular open source analytics visualization tool, okay, uh, and that
Exactly.
allows users to bring together those logs, trace metrics, so on and so forth that Azure Monitor provides. Okay, it brings out of the box a lot of dashboards that particularly I am in love. So if we go into the application overview or even the application insights dashboards, out of the box, when you present this to the customer and say, this didn't took me hours to just build it, but it's something that very quickly, like you said, and I like that point, is the lot of effort that the Azure team does and puts on this, that we don't need to do much to just getting a very good result. Okay. And if you're looking at the blog post, and I highly recommend, and I apologize for you that you are listening on the car or when you're running, because I assume that you listen to this podcast when you're running. Like me, I run a lot of times, especially from here to the coffee machine, something like that.
I was waiting to see where you were going with that
Well,
one.
that's okay. I just divert as usual. That's okay. No worries. Let's go back to the track. Is I have to say that out of the box, it's giving you a lot of graphic information with
Yes,
very little effort. It does. It's not saying that we
exactly.
cannot improve this, because there is a power button there calls edit, and we can add more. But it's a very good starting point. And
Absolutely. Yeah, like 20 minutes of effort, you can have professional quality dashboards that you pay a lot of money for in third-party software, and this is all built in part
yeah,
of Azure.
and usually looking at this, I always show off these two. The application insight, when it's an application, of course. And for example,
Mm.
the VM monitoring, okay, that you can have even if you are doing VM insights by workspace or VM insights by the resource group. And this is what I love about that, because usually, and when we are at all our clients, right, we usually say aggregate your resource group by those VMs or those lifecycle VMs, right, to
Exactly.
just put those in same, so I can now, looking out of the box on the very nice dashboard, on a very complete, almost complete dashboard, that I can customize it if I want it, out of the box, with a lot of good information there. With it, like I said, with a very minimal effort. So it's pretty awesome to see that. Even if you're going further than this, and I know that I'm going a little bit more, it's like, even if you want to see a kind of a very good way to just see it how your Azure Monitor alerts are going, you have a dashboard for that. You have a dashboard to
Oh,
see
exactly.
what are the alerts that you are coming, what are the critical, the errors, the warning information, the total alerts, and how is there going, the timelines, and all of that out of the box. Of course, that you can add again a lot of more information, but man, this is a very cool update. As you probably saw it, we are really excited about this, because it's something that when we doing all of this work at the customer side of it, right, is something that we want to give them something for them to use. Um,
Exactly, right? People need to be able to visualize the
yes.
data many times to be able to see the value of the data, right? So, unless you're a data analyst or you're in accounting or number crunching of some flavor, it's difficult for other people sometimes to understand the value of aggregating and saving all of that information into
Yeah.
storage accounts. Why am I saving all these
Yeah.
logs? So the to be able to visualize something quickly and easily and then tell the customer, hey, you can go and do this. You don't have to pay me. You go and do this, go play with it. You can customize it. If you mess it all up, no worries. You blow it away and bring in the pre-built dashboard and start a little bit
Yeah.
again.
Exactly.
And it's so easy, it's quick, and everybody can do it. This is one of the things. Like I say, I think it's so underrated because the product team has really done a fantastic job of
Yeah.
positioning this so that it's easy for all of us to use.
And it doesn't need to be the final product. It's
I feel like I'm trying to sell it all of a
yeah,
sudden. Sorry.
me too, because the part that I like about this, and curious or not, this morning I was showing this, right, and showing the potential of templates. In this case was for Sentinel, for example, but it was like the templates of and this is basically a template that you
It
are
is.
running on top of logs that they are boring. It's yes, if you like those structured data with tables and all of that, it's difficult to visualize. It is a bunch of information. It's way more granular that you want, absolutely. But if you want to visualize to kind of correlate different data points, a graphic is always been there. That's why Power BI is so
Mm.
goddamn important, and so it's one of the most I think powerful tools that Microsoft have is Power BI, because it allows you to query the data in a way that you can visualize or sum up, or even doing whatever you want to do it as a data analyst, or not, on the simple way that my mother and your mother can do it very easily, right? And I think this is that importance. This should be taken way more serious, right? As could be an end final product if you like the information there. But if you think that is missing something, we go there and we add it, and we add what we want to that information there. Or even if it's too much, we can
Absolutely.
reduce it. And that's the part I think is important. It's a template, it's a starting point, it's a trigger for us to do it. But without visualizing and without seeing, it's going to be difficult, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And just for the record, uh, the beavers have been very busy damming things up there. So
Okay.
we have to be careful about those beavers.
No worries. So let's move on to the next update. And the next update is the general availability of Azure Archive Storage, now available on Switzerland North. So Azure
Exactly.
Archive Storage it's another one that I have very few organizations that they are using, although it's something that is there, and it retains for a long term the cool data that can include, in this case, backups or archival storage. So I use this a lot, for example, for historical data for Azure Logs.
Yep, I was going to say we do talk about cold tiering
Yeah.
quite a lot with our clients, but it's sometimes has been a little bit mysterious about how do we
Yes.
do it. And this is kind of helping to take some of the mystery out of it, right? So archive storage is the cold tier. It makes it easy. We kind of think of in terms of how frequently do we access it, but how long do we have to keep it,
Yes.
right? So the colder the tier, the slower it is for us to get that data. We might have to rehydrate it. It might take a couple hours, for example, to rehydrate something in a storage account, but it could just be, a 5-second delay in accessing it. Depends on what we need to do for the tier, right?
Yes.
So in this case, we're talking about archive. It's going to be what we call kind of nearline, right? It's not offline, but we have to rehydrate the storage to use it. And then it takes a couple minutes, usually, not too bad at all, actually. It's quite
Sure.
quick and when we think about
Yeah.
rehydrating storage accounts. And this helps us to really reduce that overall storage cost. And that's important, right? Because we have to keep an eye on that. We want
Absolutely.
people to use all the cool features. We want everybody to store logs, for example, for as long as we can. 7 to 10 years is really perfect. If in case anybody's wondering right now, like, oh, well, maybe I can get away with 6 months. Don't do it. Keep it a lot longer than 6 months, please. I hear that a lot with organizations, and you talked about some of the templates and Sentinel, and it got me thinking with this archive storage. There's a lot of very good uses
Absolutely.
for the cold
Yeah.
tier, right?
And
So
but we need to be careful with that because we are reducing the low costs, okay, of archiving the data, but for accessing the data, the cost is higher. So we need to
it
balance.
is.
It's not like, oh, I'm going to retain this for 7 years, but then I'm accessing every single day or every hour. It's not built for that. It's built to
No.
just be long term with very, very, very low accessing. Okay.
Yeah, we're talking like once or twice a year.
Yeah, some
Yeah.
kind of not. I don't want to present any numbers in particular, but it's very, very low because in this case, I had a customer another day that he says, I'm using the low storage, or in this case, the archive storage, and I'm paying a fortune for that. And then we went to analyze, and he was sending that information, but he was accessing a little bit more frequent than was built for that. So that's why I was just want, because I did
It
remember
is.
that part.
Yeah. And that's true. It is a bit of a fuzzy number because it's different for every environment. It's different for how big the data sets
Yes,
are, all these different factors, especially region as
exactly.
well,
But
right?
now it's available. The good thing is available on Switzerland. So all of our bank accounts, they can use this for the long term if we want to see the distracts when we were a little bit more healthier, um, financially healthier.
I feel like my bank accounts are all cold tiered. That's fine. I'm going to use that next time when I'm at the
Exactly.
bank. That's great.
But yeah,
Oh my gosh, we're off the rails so bad
completely.
today.
It's I'm gonna blame the light. Okay, the light outside. I'm going to blame, but that's okay. Let's move on to the
I
next
couldn't
one. I
agree
think
more.
it's the safest place. Let's move on to the next one, and the next one is the public preview of stable URL for previews environments in Azure Static Web Apps. So
So it's a preview for the preview.
exactly, yeah, that's a tongue twist or whatever it is, right?
A
The
little
public
bit, right?
preview of
So
stables URL for preview environments.
I don't know if it's stable or just a preview of a stability. I'm not really sure. We're sorry, folks. We will no longer record during daylight.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't
Yeah,
promise that either.
exactly.
Okay, so this one's talking about Azure Static Web
Yes.
Apps, right? So every pull request that we have against a prod branch generates a preview deployment now available as a temporary URL,
Yes.
right? So now this is able to support preview deployments with stable URLs. And it can be configured even through the GitHub Actions workflow and enable the deployment branches by the specific deployment environment name, which is really great because now, of course, you're going to likely have multiple environments. You're going to have dev, you might have UAT and
Yes.
prod, things like
Absolutely.
that, right? So in this case, this actually does create a lot of flexibility in the sense that we can now preview before we push out all the way.
Exactly, because this is going to solve. It's still in preview. Okay, we have to say so. Please don't use this in for production environments. But this is going to solve an issue that I found that it was interesting. Okay, because sometimes when you are developing, especially when you are doing CI/CD kind of implementations, right? That you have there, and you have the GitHub actions, and you commit that, and use the Azure pipelines, for example, to deploy all the code. When you're doing that, traditionally, okay, and this is the part that's going to solve, you have every time you're deploying, you have a new URL. So you cannot have the browser open, okay? And a lot of times happens that way, that you cannot have the browse open for these are Azure Static Web Apps, to just kind of deploy, to just see, I want this picture to be a little bit more to the left or a little bit more to the right, to see if it's centralized or not. Sometimes if you want to preview those URLs, because you have stages, right? You can have the testing stage, that you are not committed that to for example, to production, and you are still development, and you want to see what is that code going to do that, and you want to use that. So you have stage, you have different environments that you can use. And now with these stable URLs, you are allowed to do that using exactly the same. So by pressing, for example, F5 on your browser, now you can see if your change is being effectively or not. Because a lot of times, for
Exactly.
example, when I was migrating my blog, for example, for Static Web Apps, um, I was trying to just change a little bit the picture and all of that, and a lot of time I had to wait. So it was kind of finishing and sometimes putting that in production to make sure that I was on the right, in this case, configuration, because it didn't allow me. It was changing completely the web the URL, and it was not stable URL. It was the dynamic one, and it was always changing. This, it will simplify that process. At least for me, I would love to have this way back then when I was doing that. You will save me tons of hours of doing that. And I think it's a pretty cool, although it's a little bit on the dev side, but it isn't at the same time. It's more an infrastructure one, and we wanted to bring, because that is something that it will easy our work, okay, especially when you have those known production branches and you want to see the preview ones. Now you have a little bit more to just even to pass that message or to pass that URL, for example, for the unit test group or the unit test team that they are doing the testing. So
Exactly.
I see a lot of good things about this, right? And
Oh, for sure. And the reality is, there's a bit of crossover between infrastructure and DevOps, and the lines aren't as solid as they used to be, right? So we have a lot of infrastructure as code, but also developing apps. And we thought, you know what, the benefit in this case is really big. So really, really totally worth talking about for us in this in our podcast this week.
absolutely.
So, anyways, what is up next in the queue? So we've talked a little bit about some storage accounts,
Yes,
right? And this time, if I may,
absolutely.
is generally available, rehydrate and archive blob to a different storage account, right? So we had to read this one twice, just even the
Yes.
title, because we were like, wait a minute, is this really just kind of all of a sudden this is GA? So it is, and congratulations, because now this is a really, really big deal, right? So we can now take an archive tier in one storage account and rehydrate it to account number 2, for
Yes.
example, right?
So, and this goes along with the first, I think, with the second update that we talk about it, about the archive storage, right? And
Yep.
be available in this case in Switzerland. It was Switzerland, right?
It
Yeah.
was Switzerland, yeah. So we talked about kind of the archive
Yes.
tier, which is now available for Switzerland North 2
Exactly.
or something,
And
and
we
then
mentioned that
go ahead.
was going in one of the applications was, for example, a backup, right? And the
Exactly.
experience that I had with the customer of mine, that he did pay a lot with Azure Storage Archive. So this is exactly one of the points that we were talking about, because now you can
It is.
rehydrate, like you mentioned, to a different storage account, even if it's a temporary one. Okay, and now it's no longer okay. We are not paying for that because you rehydrate that archive to another one, and now you can use all of the power and all of the low latency for this to just doing whatever you need that you need to do it, recover the file, for example, something like that. And then after that,
Exactly.
you can delete this, and your initial storage account is still on the archive blob.
Exactly. So this is how we kind of work around some
Exactly.
of those restrictions to help optimize cost, right? So we keep that backup account as a cold tier, like the archive tier. And then of course we have two other tiers that we should probably talk about too, right? So we have the cool and the hot tier. So hot tier is kind of the regular storage account, let's say, that we use day to
Yes.
day. That cool tier is one that we would use kind of occasionally, maybe once a month or something like that. Just, and I know we don't want to put too much of a kind of a number on it, but I have to pick something. So I'm saying occasional access. And then the archive tier, of course, is something that we don't anticipate accessing kind of almost never, right? So when we rehydrate to our live, the hot tier, and we could use a new temporary account. We could use an existing storage account and just add a new blob to it, for example. We can do a couple different things there, but this is so cool. Now there is one restriction that kind of comes to mind as I read this update, and we do have to keep it in the same region, right? So when we archive from the archive tier in account one, we'll call it the archive tier, and then we rehydrate to account two, which is the
Yes.
hot tier, we have to keep those both in the same Azure region. One of the reasons that I think totally comes to mind with that is because we're moving potentially a whole big bunch of
Yes.
data, right? So they're taking it from kind of those spinning slower disks that are much cheaper in archive to something else like an SSD of some flavor that's going to be much faster. And we have to move that across the Microsoft network. So they don't want to go from region to
Yes.
region. And I don't want you to go region to region either, because you may pay data
Yes.
egress for
Absolutely.
that. And we don't want that.
Absolutely. And there is another thing that I think it's really important. Like you mentioned this, that it may take some hours depending, because there is a maximum of 10 gigabits, or sorry, 10 gigs in a byte per storage
Mhm.
account that might be rehydrated per hour. Okay. As
Yeah, we'll have those storage account IOP limits that apply,
exactly,
which is why we kind of talked about having a
exactly.
temporary
And
storage
this
account, right?
allows you also as well to rehydrate to other arc to another blob or different storage account. It reduces those in this case costs, because like you mentioned, right, when we have those cold storage, the goal of that is not to be accessing that. So we have to remember that when we are accessing that, like you mentioned, we are rehydrate that storage, because it stays there in a state that it's not accessible, okay, or should not be it's sorry, it's accessible, okay, but it's on the very very low numbers per whatever it is, okay. But when we need to accessing those, okay, the costs that are associated with that is on the rehydrate that storage, that amount of data, okay, and that now we are leveraging to this to another different storage account that we already paying for that storage account. Although the storage account might be empty, for example, so we are not paying for that. But when we put those data there, it's when we're starting to pay. So it's going to be probably depending on what is the end goal of this. Okay, of course, always. Um, it will be more beneficial to just doing this to a different storage account. So there is always, it's a possibility that we have. It's another way that we can rehydrate, in this case, this data to a different storage account, especially when we're talking about the archive blob, right? And allows, like you mentioned, to do that. I think it's pretty cool that we have now that. And this is GA, so you can use this right now, right? And that's the benefit of all of this.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's such a cool feature. I think we're going to start to see that. Well, I know I'm going to be incorporating that into some of my business continuity plans
Absolutely.
now. It's a fantastic
It is
functionality to
even
have.
even for testing. So even if you want to explore this a little bit more, even for testing, when we are doing this, right, and you want to do, for example, a disaster recovery scenario, like you mentioned, right? We have all of those backups that they are 6 months, for example, and they are on the cold storage already because we have those daily backups, that we have a week of backups that we probably want on more accessible or faster in this. But usual backups talking about gigs of data, right? But
Yeah.
we want to test it. For example, disaster recovery, and it's going to be on a 6 months backup, for example. I don't know. I'm just making up. It is going to be way simpler to just read it right, in this case, into a new storage account. We need to prepare that. We need to have that time ahead to prepare all of those gigs that we need to read it right for that storage account. But then we are going to pound, in this case, and we want to be fast because we are paying for that. So we want performance. This is a very good example. For example, a testing of DR, for example, just to see if the application is still available or not on those type of archive blob storage, for example. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really cool. It's a small update, but it kind of sneaks in.
Completely.
It's a big deal,
It,
right?
it's
So
it's it is a big deal, and for us that we are architects, right? It's one of the things that we need to put on our list, right? To just do that
it is.
checkbox to ask, what about historical data? What do you want to do with the historical data? How frequently are you accessing? Because we need to come with all of that solution that, yes, Mr. Customer,
We do.
for that particular scenario that you are accessing historical data, for example, you can achieve this. For example, I give you another good example that I was talking this morning with Azure Sentinel, and using Sentinel as well. It's like, yes, normally we stand like 3 months of data on log analytics, but then you have the data export to a storage account, that you can
Hmm.
still use, in this case, log analytics, or Sentinel, to grab that storage account and looking for the data, or a Power BI, or whatever it is that you want to use it, right? So if that is on the storage blob because it's historical data, and if I want to access in that, I can move this to a storage account that is available to Sentinel, for example, and accessing from there. Done deal. So yeah, so another good thing
Well,
to do
that's
it. So
yeah,
another example, yeah.
right. So I have a question, and I want everybody kind of listening, especially if you're running, just stop right now. Take a
Exactly.
break. Why? What are you
Just
running from?
breathe.
First of
Just
all,
breathe.
right? Yeah, I've always said if you see me running, you should probably already be gone. Yeah. So, but joking aside, though, um, drop a quick note in the chat on AzureCentric.com's channel on YouTube, and let us know, or hit us up on Twitter or whatever whatever you
Yeah.
need to do. I want to hear, did you, when you entered the world of cloud architecture, when you transitioned from on-prem to cloud, With on-prem, we had all kinds of options. We could buy cheap disks and build a storage SAN. We could buy expensive disks and build a high-performance SAN. Did you think you would get so excited about cold tier storage recovery in Azure? Are you as dorky as Marcos and I?
Yeah.
I'm just curious how many other storage people are out there listening to this podcast on a Saturday afternoon where they want to have a good nap or something. I don't know. But I just weigh in on one of the medias and let us know, because this kind of thing, this is the kind of thing that gets us very excited, helps us to stay motivated with the podcast. And we love this stuff. I want to hear from you, and I want to hear about, did you think you would get excited about cold tier to hot tier
Oh my God.
recoveries?
Absolutely. That was awesome, I have to say, because it's those little things that excites me, and that's why I love to talk to you, and I love to have this conversation, and I love this podcast. It's because it's those boring things that everyone says, oh, whatever, historical data.
I know. We talk about this stuff at the pub when we go out, and people stare
Staring
at,
at us, say,
what are these nerds sitting here?
absolutely,
Hey, we got to do something for
exactly.
a living.
Absolutely.
Oh my
Okay,
gosh. Okay, before I end up in a worse field
you
than last year,
presenting the
we should
next one.
probably move
Let's
on.
move to the next one.
Okay, I'll try. Public preview app service configure networking in Azure Portal during app
Yes,
creation. Oh my gosh, it's like the second tongue twister of the day. Okay, so this one is
it
pretty
is,
cool, to be
but it's
honest, right?
dangerous at the same time.
Because it is. Anything where we configure networking in a wizard, I'm usually not so much of a fan of, because networking really should be quite thoughtful. We should kind of, okay, let's take a deep breath and step back, talk to the networking folks, make sure that the architecture team is, looped in on this. What are we changing? What are we deploying? And not the least of which is probably the security team, because if we're adding a new address space in our cloud somewhere, oh my gosh, we really need to coordinate this with a lot of people, right? So there's quite a bit to consider here. Not the least of which is the security thing. I have to admit, that's a bee in my bonnet when people just deploy a network and they don't add it into Azure Firewall, or they don't even tell anybody. They just add an address space, and all of a sudden we've got conflicts and routing problems. And yes, it's avoidable.
Yeah,
Talk to the wonderful coworkers you have. They are very smart people. They do their job for a very good reason, and they will help you.
yeah,
They will help me. They will help all of us. So, but this update in particular, it's public preview. So, a little sketchy. Maybe don't use it in prod just quite today. But what we can do with this one is it now supports configuring the network options of virtual networks and private endpoints.
yeah,
Aha. So now we see why this is going to be here, right? Because we want to deploy a resource with a private endpoint attached to it, not after the fact when it becomes kind of difficult. But now we can do this, and it's in preview as part of the wizard when we deploy an app service through the portal, so the
yes,
GUI. Right now, it's also supported through Azure CLI and ARM templates as well. But it's a tricky
it
one.
is.
So yes, we can, but please consult all of the right teams and people, and make sure you communicate too much about it before you test it out, even in your test environments, because address space conflicts are no joke. They can take down prod even in dev. Depends how things are peered and tied together and routes are working. We have to be careful with those things. And I know I'm saying the word be careful too many times here, but I really have to make sure that you heard me, because we don't want to test a preview feature and cause a problem in
Yeah,
prod, right?
and I understand this. I understand this on the way that Microsoft wants to make this simple process, right? For you when you configure in this case on app service that you can because the possibility of having those private endpoints, it's great. You don't need to go to the internet, you don't need to have a public, you don't need to expose that. I totally get it, but it kind of concerns me a little bit because we've been on this position before that this opens a possibility of a sprawl of networks, of a sprawl of bad configuration, of a sprawl of having something like even when you're creating just for testing, and when you delete it, okay, you are not deleting all the resources to create through this,
That's right. There's a private endpoint
and
and a
there is a
VNet still
VNet
out
out
there.
there. And it's not only that, because virtual machines, for example, when you create, you can also create with secure network, but you don't have the same configuration. That's the part that I really don't like. This option is not I don't like. I kind of see the dangers of this option. Is you don't have is if you create, for example, a VNet, okay, you don't have the same options that you have when you're creating a networking through an app service, in this case, or through a VM. Usually you giving the VNet name, you giving the UR the address space for that VName, and then you creating the subnet. Period. Right? You don't have, for example, NSGs attached. That is a kind
Mm.
of a
Yeah.
security way. You don't have anything like that attached to usually all of these. And when you going into create a VNet, you can create multiple subnets, for example. And okay, you can create that. You can attach. So usually, like I said, I was saying it's dangerous. It's dangerous because of that. I totally get it because it's going to be way easier for beginners to create an app service, or individuals that they are not, in this case, too much keen with the infrastructure, to just build all of these app services from a single portal, from a single plane, like on the next kind of finish way that Microsoft always give us in the past 47 years, right? But it's give us, for us, that we are admins, that we are architects, and giving all of that, it's like it's tremendous because I'm starting to see a lot of issues here. For example, if you apply Azure policies, okay, if you apply a lot of those type of things that you apply accordingly to Azure networks, for example, or virtual networks, in the middle of the process you get an error and you don't know why, right? Because you are creating an app service that you are allowing, but you want to control, for example, the virtual networks to be created because of that, because of the zero trust, because of the modeling, the zero trust architecture, the way that you want to control all the flow and all of that. What's going to happen with that VNet? And then sometimes you have, for example, a storage account that you have on other one, or you have even a Azure SQL that is on other VNet, and we know that VNets, when you create it, they are kind of isolated, and now you are not working with that. So it's a lot of complexity that we are trying to solve one particular, not one particular, but a few issues, and we want to make it simple, but we are adding so much complexity. I'm glad that this is happening because the good thing about this is now we can power this through Azure CLI and ARM templates, so which is good. So now on the ARM templates, the part that I love about this is I don't need to nested templates anymore. On the same
Hmm.
template, I can have the creation of that virtual network and controlling that. For me, it's awesome, right? But for the normal John Doe, I have to say, um, it can be dangerous if you don't know what you are doing, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's just that note of caution. Be careful. deploying a network is great, but if you're connected in any way, kind of back to prod, just talk over communication never really caused a bit of a outage,
Exactly.
right? But kind of miscommunication or under communication, uh, we can't say that.
Exactly. And
So,
it's a very nice feature. Okay. It is a very
it
nice
is. It
feature.
is, right? It's a great advancement. I love how they're tying private endpoints to service
Exactly.
deployments. That's a fantastic way to go. I think we just need to figure out how do we get safe deployment of VNets and subnets tied in with that in a way that can really involve the right teams in enterprise organizations. Even in small business, it's a little bit more dangerous because they may not have something like a break glass account set up where they can actually get
Yeah.
back in if they end up being locked out, for
Because
example.
it's
So,
exactly like that. Because if you
oh,
see the way that you are doing this is you are creating an app service, right? So you are creating basically a website, you are creating basically an app. But for example, when you create that, you usually don't have the possibility of creating a sequel, right? Where are you going to put the sequel? Azure SQL. You're going to put on a different VNet. So if you are enable this through the portal, right? You changing the way that you are deploying, you changing the way that you are configuring, and by creating a new network, it's awesome that you can create a new network, but it's isolated because even if you have different ones, you need to peering those networks. Um, do we have that option doing that? I don't think that we have that option because peering, it's after you creating the network. It's not during the creation
yeah.
of the network.
Well, there has to be two network resource objects already in existence to be able to complete the peering,
Exactly.
right? So,
So yeah, yeah. But although it's good that we have this, and this is exactly the perfect segue for the um next update. That is the general availability of app service on network capabilities, adding to the basic price tier. Like it's awesome to have this because now this is all attached that usually was not attached on the basic and now tiering, and now it's attached to the basic tier. So be able to have private link, okay, and eliminating that exposure like we talked on the previous update of the public internet. It's way more secure,
exactly.
but it's coming on a tier that is on the basic SKU. So it's
That's
going
right.
to be good for,
Yeah, we used to have to go to standard, I
yeah,
think, to get the private endpoint abilities,
exactly.
right?
And that was a little bit more expensive, of course, and we probably don't need it,
It is.
right? And now be able to
Yeah.
do
So
this on the basic tiering is really good.
so we can deploy VNets, we can deploy private endpoints, and we can do it on the basic pricing tier for app
Yes,
service. So some of it's in testing, some of it's in preview. We just had that one kind of in the past. Let it go, Andrew. And now we have this one. And this is in general availability. So now things are all tied together for the basic SKU, makes it really a very much like a much more capable SKU. And it also makes it easier to deploy app services,
yes.
right?
It
Yeah,
makes easier and cheaper, right?
it does. Yeah, because it ties it all together, integrates everything. And again, talk with your network folks, your security folks, and life is good.
Exactly. And this doesn't, you don't need to deploy this in this case. We don't need to deploy this uh, with the same because the other update that we were talking about was a public preview. While you are
Correct.
creating those app services, you can configure the network. In this case, is in order for you to use the private link, you don't need to go to a higher SKU. You can use the basic one, which it's adding more functionalities to the basic SKU, and that's probably for you. it will save you a few bucks. Let's go this way, if not more, because it's more functionality that we have on the basic tier. If you don't need the performance and um, all of those capabilities that the higher stand are the SKUs giving to you, right?
Oh, exactly. Yeah, and it's really good when they roll additional services in. I shouldn't say that. When Azure rolls additional services into existing SKUs, because it allows customers to redeploy if they need to and get those access to those new features that are integrated. Again, it's all about making it easy to use the services, easy to consume
Absolutely.
the Azure services. And our job as architects is to let you know about these things on the podcast, but also to tell you be careful when you roll the dice. Sometimes you don't win.
No. And if you have the same luck as me, we can have a draw between you and me, and I have 100% sure that you're gonna win. So,
We could stop at the dollar store and buy dice and save money. I have no place in a casino. I
oh, I
don't win
don't need
anything.
dice because I want to lose every time, so that's okay. Um, no worries. That's why I only play like games that I can control, no luck games that I can control the outcome. Like for example, racing, driving, something like that. Um,
I see. I thought we were going to talk about Go Fish all
no,
of a sudden.
not at all, not at all. That's okay. But with that, we come to the end of our podcast. So thank you so much for being here, Andrew. One more time. I lost the count of how many times that we already did this, but is going to be above 50 for sure. Um,
Oh,
and
nice.
and yeah, thank you so much for you that you are viewing and listen to us. Don't forget to subscribe to help us. It's free, and it's like my friend and you says it's guaranteed money back. So
Absolutely. Hey, while you're there subscribing, drop a comment
exactly
in and let us know if you're excited about cold to hot tier
as
restores.
we are,
We
we
have to
have to know.
know.
We cannot be the only ones in the world being so excited about that. Yeah,
Right?
exactly. So thank you once again, and see you next week. Bye for now.